have a lot of different questions to get through and try to explore this topic of moving from Web 2 to Web 3. Maybe Sebastien, I can start with you. What's been your approach with the sandbox towards embracing this idea of blockchain games?
Well, the approach is very historical and related to user-generated content. Sandbox originally started as a mobile game on iOS and Android in 2012. We enable users to create their own level, their own pixel-arted world just by the touch of a finger on the mobile screen. It became a large success. Over 8 years, the game grew to 40 million installs. We had more than 70 million creation. So we were able to really push toward our vision of turning players into creators. At the same time, we kind of had a challenge of retention and a challenge of rewarding those creators for the contribution they make to the game and the financial success they brought to the company, since we had literally no way to give them back even any portion of the revenue generated through by the company for their content, for the time they spent, their involvement. So we were looking for a better solution to this problem. And at the end of 2017, we saw the first NFTs, which were like CryptoKitties, virtual cats on the blockchain. And we had that revelation that rather than having developers make more content as NFT, what if we enable just anyone to make their own NFTs and through there own the content and have that possibility to monetize it, transfer it to other users, and do other applications beyond their original intent. And that's what we've been focused on for the past 3 years now, launching a new version of Sandbox, a 5x 3D multiplayer, becoming a platform more than a game with content creation tools that are very accessible and enabling players and creators to own the content they create and monetize it the way they want.
Cool, fantastic. And of course, anybody else, if you have things to add, please feel free to jump in because I don't want to move through questions too fast if you have perspectives or things to share. Thinking about that, Sebastien, and that great introduction, I want to ask you, Chase, actually, from your perspective, why do you think, when you think about, talking to other developers, what do you tell them when you think, well, why should game developers consider moving to Web3, like either from an economic or a technical perspective? Maybe, what made you make that choice, and why do you think that's perhaps a good choice for others to make as well?
Yeah, I guess that harkens back with my experience as a games publisher in the past. Typically I would review, I'd say, hundreds of games in a yearly basis, but I'm only able to at least publish 15 or at the maximum 20 of them. That's already prolific. And everything else is either they look for a different publisher or they work independently to sort of really push their games out there and market it themselves. And the big problem with that is that there is this huge inequity in terms of how free to play games are sort of being made right now, wherein a lot of times they do need the spending power of a publisher for their games to be discovered in the App Store, for example. And it's much worse, I'd say, in the HTML5 game space, where there is not a solid pathway to distribution as compared to mobile games, for example. At least in mobile, you have Unity, and then you have Unity ads, and then you can go to the Google Play Store and the App Store. But with HTML5, a lot of times, you have to work really tirelessly to be able to actually push your game to virality, or for people to be able to discover it on itch.io, or give donations and stuff like that. And so when I talk to developers, I ask them exactly how their experience is monetarily on HTML5. And a lot of them say they do it for fun. They do it because it's their passion, which is actually really good. But if you really come to think of it, can there be a reality where they can both do it for fun and for passion, but at the same time, earn something with it? And that's kind of the reason why, we've sort of set up OP Games as well, is that we're pushing for that inclusivity, specifically on the HTML5 game space, where that pathway to monetization does not really exist, or if it does, it just favors only a couple of people, or only those who got really viral or got really lucky. So when I talk to them about that, they go you know what, Chase, that seems like everything to gain and maybe a few hours of my time to lose. So let's give it a go, and let's discover that model and see how it works for us.
Sure. No, that's really cool. That's really cool. And I assume, that that also is a nice segue into this whole idea of building player communities. So maybe, Andrzej, if I can pick on you next and ask you about player communities, because I know you've been very involved in building player communities. And how do you think maybe that Web3 games, potentially better enable player communities, or is it better? Do you have more tools or advantages in Web3 to help build community, and how does that relate?
I will actually start with the previous question, if I may, adding
Please,
to
go for
what
it.
Chase said. Because as an actual web game developer, we struggle a lot to make a living out of publishing web games. And we have to do many deals with different publishers to publish our own games. There are different models to earn money directly with publishers, but it usually ends up being publishers adding adverts to the games. So basically 90-ish% of the revenue, if not more, is basically just sticking ads to web games and seeing how annoyed players are. And I think Web3 introduces so much potential, so many other options to actually try and see what happens. And maybe we can explore that and see if there are other ways than just sticking with the biggest publishers, because even if the games are published on those portals, right now there are so many web games, so many HTML5 games, that it's really hard to get noticed, and because of that, it's really hard to earn any money. And getting to the second question about communities, I think, like, from what I'm seeing with JS13K games competition, which is actually a competition, but there's a friendly community of people who actually help each other playtest games, fix bugs, etc. So that's really awesome to see. People are really trying the new technologies and they're quite excited about it. They not necessarily know how to make good games for the platform, for the tools they have, but they seem excited about learning how to do it. And there are more and more developers, Web2 developers, exploring new possibilities and trying to see what they can build given their years or even decades of experience building games using the new technologies.